Hello everyone, my name is Jenny Danielsson. I'm here with Astrid Kruse Jensen and we're about to go in and have a look at her current exhibition here with Wetterling Gallery. Let's go.
Yeah.
We're having coffee.
Yeah.
Astrid, I was thinking next year marks 20 years since you graduated from the Glasgow School of Art.
Yeah.
And how has your relationship with photography changed over the course of your career?
Oh, it's. I would say that it has changed during the whole of my life because actually, working with photography is something that I did already as a child. So I grew up with a dark room in the house of my parents, but it was more like it was more something that was there, and my parents were working in the darkroom making pictures. And actually, because I lived in Africa as a child, these pictures that my parents photographed, and that we, all these stories we were told on, what we experienced, that was kind of an important part of that journey, which also became an important part of my understanding of myself. So somehow I already started quite early to have an interest in this. How can photography actually capture memory, and how can it influence or change memory? So I always had this interest. I thought it was a really, really interesting medium, and of course I started out working more traditionally with photography, taking pictures of what was around me. And then when I knew that, this was more than just something I did beside doing other things, I knew that I wanted to work with photography as an artistic medium and an artistic practice. But I always had this kind of interest in the photography, and not taking a photograph as I started out doing, but trying to make a photograph. And I think that has kind of followed me since art school. This somehow staging or working with the reality around me, but not showing it exactly as everyone else would see. So it's been an interest in the medium as, as a way I could make abstractions of the reality around us.
And so your parents, were they both photographers?
No, but they were working with photography. So my mom is still photographing a lot. So they just photograph a lot. And my father, he's an architect. So that was also a part of his practice to photograph.
So that's why they had the dark room at the house and so on.
Yeah. And I think since 20 years ago, it sounds like a lot. But I think until 2010, I was working, I had one approach to photography, where I was working with the technical aspects of photography as well. I was working with photographing at night, with a lot of equipment, tripods, medium format cameras, and always working with the analog photography. So it was always, related to an after work in a dark room. So I was photographing, but trying to manipulate what was around me while I was photographing. I was working with very long exposures already at that time, working at night, so I could have these saturated colors that didn't look like the colors that we would just see while we were passing the same setting, but creating a kind of I call a big body of work like imaginary realities. So it was a way of dealing with reality, but also trying to create a kind of a parallel reality. And then in 2010, there was a major change in my approach to my working process, where I experienced to have problems with my sight. So I had problems focusing. I had, it was really scary. I think, nearly a year, I didn't know if it was coming back or what was actually the problem. But then I tried to control my panic by actually saying, okay, if I have to take this further into my working method and process, I have to kind of use it actively and positively instead of panicking, even though I did a bit. But so I decided, like, okay, normally I work in the night, I'll work in the day. Normally I work with a tripod. I'm gonna be holding my camera in my hands. Normally I control the shutter, the aperture, everything. Everything was completely controlled, and I was measuring the light so many different places to have the perfect light situation. So I decided, okay, I want to let go of that, and I want to, kind of use this as a starting point for something completely new. And then it's like, okay, I work with a technical camera. How can I let go of all that? And also because I always worked in the darkroom, where I could also, still do changes in the process. I thought, okay, how can I actually continue? And is it photography that I'm going to continue? But I knew that I really, really wanted to. And then because Polaroid went bankrupt, I knew that there was a lot of materials out there that were expired. And within this small Polaroid, it is like a darkroom just under the surface, because you have all the chemicals down here. And when you kind of take the Polaroid, when you take the picture, it will be developed on the way out, or the chemicals will be spread, and then it will be developed in your hand, but it's locked inside the surface, so I can't touch it anymore. So I thought that was really, okay, and here I can't control the shutter speed, I can't control the light situation. So I thought, okay, it's still a chemical process, but I can't control the chemicals. It's still a camera, it's a light-proof box, but I can't control a lot of the technical aspects. So it was a beginning of a completely new process.
Yeah, because photography is curious in that it is both about taking and processing the photographs.
Yeah. And I think for me it was then turning it completely around, saying I have to believe that I'm still making. I'm not, capturing a specific decisive moment. I'm trying to make a moment, to make an image, and then also to let go, to be, to be in charge of what was happening to the material, to the chemicals as well in the process. And by actually finding out that there was all these, I see them as, it was really precious to experience how this chemical process suddenly became a really important part of the motive itself. Where before, when I was working, or in my earlier work when I was working with the chemicals, it just did what I wanted it to do, because I could control everything, and I knew that if I lit it, 10 more seconds, it will be a slightly bit more magenta, all this, and then suddenly I had to let go. And also because the chemical reaction, because the chemicals are expired, they will react differently, if the films have been kept cold or warm, or I don't know. So they will all react in different ways, and suddenly the chemicals became really present. So if you work with painting, you look at okay, is it oil painting, or is it acrylic, and you go into the material in that sense. And I thought, okay, this is a way to actually let the chemical process become a part of the motive itself. So where the chemical process normally, when working with photography, is invisible, I really try to make it visible and be a precious part of the motive itself.
I mean, you often work within series.
Yeah.
Here at Wetterling, it's called Floating.
Yeah.
When did you start working with that series?
That was in 2019.
And that's an ongoing project?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
And I think that's always how I work, that, you know, also in my, you know, throughout my whole practice, that, you know, they kind of slip on top of each other, and then I know that, okay, you know, I knew that I wanted to make the pictures in Iceland, which is they're in the show as well, some of them. So that was kind of my starting point, the Icelandic work, and then, you know, I was working from there.
So how do you define a series for yourself? Is that a theme, or is it the method you're working with, or is it the time?
Yeah, it's a combination.
Or do you only know afterwards?
I think it's very much a combination, because I don't work like, you know, with this strong conceptual photography. It's more writing is a very important part of my process as well, and it's often through that I feel a change. So I know that there's a change going on, that, you know, you could say throughout my whole praxis I have an interest in memory and photography related to memory as well. So that's been kind of following me through all my work. But then with this floating, it was very much, I was in a situation where I felt that a lot of things that I could decide early in my life, I could not decide any longer, in the same sense that what we experience now with the COVID, you know, we are no longer in complete control of our lives. And I had experiences like that I kind of wanted to work with in a more poetic sense, but also, you know, to have these elements of, you know, by using the Icelandic landscape, it's also to introduce a landscape which is so beautiful, but also, you know, has so much uncontrollable within it, you know, the lava, and you know, something can happen within this beautiful environment every time, but you know.
Yeah, let's go back to the beautiful.
Yeah.
Some of your work are very, very beautiful.
Yeah.
What's your relationship with the beautiful?
I think, as also one of my book is called, it's like beauty will always be disturbed, and I think I'm not afraid of anything being beautiful, but I'm afraid of it only being beautiful. So I see it more as it's a method to reach something and not to be afraid of it, but always to have the cracks, always to let it be, you know, there's always a layer underneath, kind of, you know, sticking out, questioning the beautiness or the poetic elements as well. So
yeah, and I think that ties back to floating, the series of work, because on the one hand, floating means not sinking. So it's keeping yourself on the surface, but it's both really terrifying and liberating. Yeah. And there's emotional journey or sense within that that's really striking.
But I think that's what I kind of also with the beauty and the cracks. And I think that's kind of going through all my work, that there's always these contradictions. You know, you can always, you know, it's nearly like the works and is in process, and you are in process while you look at the work, and the person is moving from one state to the other. So I always work with these contradictions between like the real, you know, I photograph, so it is a print of something which is real, but I also work with it in a way to make, you know, to open for a more abstract space.
Yeah, because even though you record something which is true in that moment, and the camera helps you to see things that you could not do yourself, it becomes a memory of something, and we can't really trust memories.
No. Or they will change all the time as we change.
Yeah. Which is magical, and I think it's also just part of life. Yeah. And therefore, I mean, that's really one of the strong aspects about photography, I would say. Yeah. As a medium. How about we have a look at the works
Yes.
in the exhibition. We are going to talk about Iceland because you have a very special relationship with the island.
Yeah, but I had the residency in 2002, the first residency ever since graduating. And it really, it kind of made a big impact on me and also a big change in my whole approach to the landscape, to myself, because this was also the first time I kind of experienced feeling really small within the landscape, you know, because again, what we experience now with COVID, where, you know, things are happening without us being in control, that was kind of how I felt meeting that landscape. So it's representing something which is a lot bigger than ourselves. So that was really touching, and somehow that's kind of been me ever since. So in 2019, I went on a residency to exactly the same place, exactly the same studio environment, 17 years after. It was kind of a travel in time, and also
sounds
travel
amazing.
and a travel in my whole approach to photography, and then actually trying to capture this feeling of meeting something which is so beautiful, so scary as well, but also, you know, which had this duality within it. So that's the three pieces that we have here. They're called the lava of the mountains of lava.
The mountains of lava. So this is the lava.
And then you have these, and that's the chemical traces again, which is kind of a gift, where you have these small chemical dots, and it looks like they're coming out of the mountain, but it's not like lava, it's nothing threatening, it's more poetic, it's more like bubbles coming out. So I kind of like that contradictionary in the piece. It's the same in this one here with the figure.
Yeah. So actually that is not the sun or the sunset or the moon, that is a chemical dot in the middle of everything.
No.
That is...
It is the sun going down.
It is the sun going down.
Yeah. But I kind of like that you asked that question, because it, you know, it could be chemical traces as well. So a lot of people, they also ask like these, did you put on these layers of stars? And it's really important for me that it's information, it's within the material, it's nothing that I've kind of added afterwards. In Iceland, they are also not afraid of the magical. They're also not afraid of what we can't explain. And that was also really intriguing for me. All these stories about, you know, the hidden people, what's inside the landscape, you know, so of course my approach was different, but still to have this openness to something that you can't explain. That was more, and I've tried to take that with me, that we can't control that landscape, and we shouldn't control it.
But we can learn how to live within it.
Yeah, and protect it. Yeah, and not believe that we have to control it. Yeah,
that's possible. Yeah. All right, so now we have moved to these two, the drifting space.
Yeah. I think while I started out with the Icelandic landscape, that's also, you know, how I work, that I write a lot about this. So I wanted to make a body of work where the landscape, the interior, the figure within the interior or the landscape, and the medium itself, the chemicals, were kind of merged together. And also, again, to have this constant interaction between an outer space, an inner space, the landscape, and then to also to create these abstractions, to make them into more metaphysical spaces, more abstract spaces. So it's spaces that we know. We could know this room. It could be yours, it could be mine, but it's any room. So I've been working with my own personal spaces. They are photographed in the houses that we lived in, and in my studio at that time in the forest. So the surroundings, which are not from Iceland, are around the studio space in the forest. And the way I've been working here is that, of course, you see here's the door to the garden. You have the doors open here. And when working with a Polaroid camera where it doesn't have the same capacity as a medium-sized format camera, I've been using my own body as the tripod, and then using the light as my player here. So I've been standing still. And this is, I don't know, because I can't decide how long time the shutter should be open. So it's always to look for certain kind of light situations that are not, there's not too much light, because then, the shutter will go down really fast. So while working with this uncontrollable element, I also learn, to control that somehow. So it's this balance again, but I've been standing still with the camera, and then after a certain time I move around, and that's where I get the traces of light going down here. So it's not like painting with light, but I use the strokes of light to become a part of the image, and also to create this abstraction of the architectural space. And in this other piece here, you can kind of slightly see the door here to the next space, and then there's light to the next space down here. And actually, these lights coming down here are from the window just behind me. So I've been standing like this here, photographing, and then turning around and getting you can see slides, these here from the windows. So it's a way I'm photographing what's in front of me, but I'm also creating a completely new space, because I'm taking what's behind me and in front of me into one surface. So that's what I do on location. So I try to make that manipulation of the space, or transformation of the space, while I work.
Which is interesting, because the camera is obviously a device, something that you're holding, and here you're incorporating the memory of that movement.
Yeah. In this piece here as well, where I'm standing again in the space, photographing the space, but then I move the camera slowly. So actually this window here is repeated here. So I kind of try to break up the architectural space by actually moving the camera slightly.
And who is she? Who is this woman?
I always talk about them as figures. So they are figures, it's no specific person. So I use them to represent this feeling of becoming part of the space itself, or the landscape. So it's no specific, it's different models that I use, but I use the same for several works. Yeah.
A striking thing about your models is their hair.
Yeah.
They often have absolutely amazing hairstyles.
Okay.
Yeah,
yeah, of course.
Of
because
course
that's, yeah. But I think it's for me, it's I can't say that it's just the hair. It's more the whole presence of them, how they kind of interact in the space. That's kind of what what I look for. Yeah. So it's not so much, it's them within how they move, how they interact. I couldn't work with a person who's like this here. So it's very much looking for someone who kind of represent what I'm looking for in the work as well.
So this figure, this model, you've picked the clothes, the hair, of course, and then was she standing still?
Mm-hmm. But then I'm moving slightly.
And you're the one moving. All right. Yeah.
So it's always there standing still, and you see it as well here in this piece here. But it's more, it's a tiny movement that I have here, just to kind of to break the lines of the stairs. So it's different ways of working with my own body and my own movements in connection to the space or the environment. So I I kind of just move it slightly. And here I've been also working with the spaces also in my house, where it's kind of different rooms, you know, it's 3 rooms connected to each other, but then there's a slight double exposure that I've done afterwards of the same space, but photographed behind me again. So it's not through a movement, but through a double exposure I've done that. And here you see, there was one yesterday who asked about, oh, but it looks like watercolor, and that it is again the chemicals kind of running down the surface. So you have it here, it's much more subtle, but it's still become a very important part of the surface of the work.
Again, we are close to your studio in Denmark.
And actually, it's called The Landscape of Memory, and it also talks about this ambiguity of memory, as we talked about earlier, about, you know, what is memory? It's a really dynamic, you know, size that can change all the time. So I wanted to place her in a setting. We have traces that it could be a lake that she's standing at. And because I'm working with a lot of backlight, I'm able to create a more graphical structure in front of her. Together with her, she becomes more like a graphical element. And actually, what she's looking at, you can't see. So that's kind of also a dialogue to the memory that, you know, you look at it and you can't really grasp it. You have, you know, you remember some of it, and then you know, because where you are in your life right now, you'll continue the story from there, and maybe it will change in a year. But actually, she's looking at something that we can't see and we can't really grasp. And that's also, you know, my whole interest in the notion of memory, like how can we actually remember things, and what can photography help us? How can it help us, or can it distort memory or change it? And then to work with all these aspects, but here it's really like the landscape of memory, and I'm serving a foreground, but you can't really see the landscapes she's looking at. So
we can also only assume that there's a landscape behind her.
Exactly. Yeah.
That we are standing in a landscape as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much for the show.
Thank you so much for the nice talk.